Welcome back to Highway Through Health. We're not a crisis line, we're not a therapy show, and we're not licensed healthcare providers. What we are is a place where lived experience is taken seriously because too many people have discovered the more clearly they speak, the worse they're treated. We share personal experience not to give medical advice, but so that when people encounter the kinds of situations we discuss, they're ready to recognize patterns and respond effectively. This show is about language, power, and what happens when systems stop listening and start translating people into problems. If you've ever felt misheard, mislabeled, or punished for staying coherent under pressure, you're in the right place.
Everybody to Highway Through Health. We thank the people that are continuing to watch us and follow along as we're doing this. Today, we want to talk about something that's kind of intense. It's a neuroplastic rock, really, where we talk about where life energy finally gets up and starts destroying that death energy. And experientially, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's a place where you just get up, you put your woes on the table, you pick up your defiance, and you get moving. I mean, there's no challenge, there's no obstacle, there's nothing that really stops you at that point from moving from one point to the next. And it's really hard to learn how to do that in the beginning, but after we did it, I think for me, as it came along and that became just this thing that we do to offset the affliction becomes more of a neuroplastic exercise. We begin to train ourselves and to where these big, massive, intense emotions don't throw us off our program like it does somebody. And to give you a feel for that, I mean, when I went through my rebirthing experience, when I think back on the momentousness of that whole thing. If you're one of those people that would, you see a blind person getting ready to step out in front of a bus, you'd probably grab them and tell them to cut it out, right? But this is even more intense because when you're in the Holy Spirit, and this is one reason why I believe that the vast majority of people who claim that they've had experiences in the Holy Spirit are probably exaggerating a little bit because I mean, you're tied into the woes of the world. You know what
Oh
it
yeah.
is, you know where it comes from, and you know the people, places, and the ideas that are pushing forward this type of energy that keeps people blocked into what they are. And it is very intense. And to stay calm in the midst of all that. So when we're talking about the calmness that we have, the peace that surpasses all understanding, it comes about as we're experiencing those types of things. Does that make sense to you, Dana?
Yeah, it really is very much because for me in some ways it happened in increments because people were trying to stop it, but I was starting to have this real understanding of things like I have zero math. I'm like I count on my fingers. But I was starting to see how things were like the universe and God had created things in a particular kind of pattern. And all this while they were, this treatment team kept shoving me in the hot every time I started to have more insights. Not me, of course, at that point, I knew I was being domestically abused. Didn't realize that my ex had been hired to be a minder, or as he yelled, observer. And so I'm telling him this stuff, and of course he's calling, saying you need to be stabilized, and it was just horrible.
Right.
But as I was realizing this stuff, it was like, God, I wish I had somebody that I could tell this to who legit understood and wanted to help me walk through it
Right.
because it was like a literal energy. And as I was starting to understand in depth a little more about the chakras and energy centers throughout the body, and I felt it in my spine. And at least one of these seizures that I had was a different kind of seizure. It was like this full body seizure. And I said to my ex, I said, oh my God, my soul is throwing up. And
Yeah.
that was exactly what it was. And it doesn't take you out of touch with reality. It makes you understand a higher plane of reality. It
Right.
gives you a more in-depth understanding about spirituality as we are experiencing it here on earth. It is much more of an expanded knowledge. than a contracted one. And it certainly is something that, again, if it's making you understand a depth of love, understanding how we are all interconnected, how we are all supposed to be here as a piece of something greater than ourselves through God's expression, as a piece of God's expression, that should be celebrated and supported, not suppressed.
I
And it is
completely
very
agree.
much, yeah, you can't. I already had not been able to stand to see anyone or anything suffer. Like, I love my animals, and part of what they did was purposely separate me from them, and it broke
Mhm.
my heart. I really, it's still too difficult for me to talk about, but it's like they did this intentionally. They knew what they were doing. They were torturing me to see how I was going to react. In other words, they were misusing what Viktor Frankl had written, um, about man's search for meaning. These are not good people. Um,
Right.
and for me, and I'm sure for you as well, we want to be able to encourage people that are having these sort of spiritual experiences, to not feel frightened, to not, to give them kind of a frame of reference in some ways, because I don't want people to ever have to go through how we were punished for having these deeper understandings and this deeper relationship with God. I don't want anybody to ever be punished for that.
I completely
You know,
agree.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, it's such an intense thing and it's such a beneficial thing. But this when you start talking about dying daily and actually you start learning how there's a process where you go by where that stuff starts to happen to you and you start having these things happen. And this is not hallucinations. We're not talking about, you know, doing witchcraft or anything of that nature. This is honesty. This is just working through our program that what we have to do to offset the affliction. And I recognize it absolutely as a Christian practice because I can pull those things straight out of the New Testament, even though they're kind of scattered around a bit, but it's all there. So you know, part of I think what we're doing here is kind of begging for some changes that stop calling people going through these things silly things like you're manic or you're psychotic or you're delusional or you start putting all these labels and terminologies onto people, which of course trigger reactive responses from medical teams in terms of forced druggings or ECT or misunderstandings and things of that nature. To the mental health community, you're not helping us. You're not helping us at all. In fact, you've become major obstacles to this process. You have overlapped virtually everything about what this is with pathology language that is just ruins the whole thing. So we really have to get to the point somehow, in some way, to where we can start being cooperative in this realm once again. And I'm kind of not sure how to get there because I think what happens is we start getting too precise and it starts making people nervous. As we were talking about, when you start pointing things out to people that don't fit their structure, what they've been trained, their trained distortion that they've made part of their lives, they go to protect that distortion. And in the case if you were in the Holy Spirit and you do notice somebody that's having serious problems and you walk up to them and start talking to them in a way that that what they're suffering, how to unlatch themselves from that, you're going to come off to them as being crazy. And that's not what we want to do. And
no.
I kind of wonder what do we got to do to get past that? I'm not sure.
I think it's really, it kind of starts with like exactly what we're doing, like having these discussions and conversations. And as you pointed out, and it's the truth, um the pseudoscience of psychiatry is a state-sponsored eugenics cult. They are there to profiteer. I don't think that every single person is aware of what they're doing, but unfortunately, far too many are, and they are indulging in experimentation, evil, amorality for sure, and just straight up fraud. And this shouldn't be happening. But it's happening at the level of, the so-called research hospitals on down. They know they're doing this. They knew what they were doing to me. I'm not going to mince words about that. Psychiatry does come out of Nazis. It definitely has Nazi lineage attached, and these folks are using and misusing things that came out of Nazi concentration camps. They directly are doing that, and they shouldn't be. And people should know this. The average person should know this because they should know what they're up against. We have to figure out ways to counteract it and to make sure that the stories of those of us who have had certainly the spiritual experiences, but also other people that have been harmed and are finding their way through the thicket of neuroplasticity, of recovery, in ways that are through the creative arts, through other means and methods that allow for trauma reintegration, that allow for this. I'm very grateful again that psychedelics are kind of seeing something when you have people who are experienced as healers, who are there to actually heal, to give people an experience that allows, and then again, properly followed up, doesn't require drugs of any sort
Right.
every day. But it does require wanting to do the work. It does require wanting that spiritual connection. It does require fostering then whatever kinds of new neural pathways that may have been helped to be rewired through a psychedelic experience or even just through a spiritual experience like we've had. How do you strengthen that? How do you continue that? Because it doesn't require any kind of drugs of any sort. It requires being able to work with that. It requires being able to, push past things in a way that doesn't require anything exogenic because our bodies do have the ability to heal themselves, even as Jesus talked about that in the New Testament. And this is something that even science has discussed. And there have been different people who have acknowledged this, who have acknowledged going back to like indigenous knowledge that's from many thousands of years ago that even predates the Bible, but certainly the Bible supports it. And to be able to bring that back into a more in a modern way. I mean, again, I think there's been a lot of mistakenness with these prosperity preachers and whatnot. They've really perverted the message of Christ. They've really perverted any kind of spirituality. And the Bible is a living document. We are meant to have miracles now, and they do happen. And I think by being able to speak up about what we've experienced in a way that's very truthful, very honest, that explains to people, no, your life isn't going to be a bed of roses after this. In fact, you may find yourself dealing with some of the things that the apostles did in Acts.
Right.
You may find yourself in a position not unlike Saint Stephen, to be honest with you. I know I've certainly felt that kind of comparison deeply. Given, like I said, I've lost everything to identity thieves, frauds, and traffickers from the pseudoscience of psychiatry and so-called treatment team. These were crooks. They were knowing they were crooks, and they were hired to be that kind of amoral nonsense and those kind of abusers. That's who they hired from the state. That says an
Yeah.
awful lot, and it's not good. But like I said, when you have this experience, I lost everything I ever owned. But on the other hand, I still know that I'm living my life's purpose. I know I'm doing the Lord's work because I'm helping to expose this stuff. So I think we've really kind of reached a tipping point and a turning point within finding that this is, fraudulent misuse of different things, that these are eugenics drugs, that people are still experiencing miracles, that there's a reason why there's so many death and near-death experiences like you and I have both had. And there's a reason for it, and there's a reason why there's so many people now coming back to discuss this. There's a reason why you're under that people are now understanding the link between autism and telepathy. So there's a reason why there's a lot of this happening now, and it is because God does create everything in balance, and there was definitely far too much of people misusing, thinking they were God, not just a part of God, but thinking they were God. So we are kind of having like a Tower of Babel moment again, is where I feel like we are at this point. And
Yeah.
for the betterment of all of us, honestly, it's to have these sort of modern false constructs collapse is not a bad thing.
No, I
And
think a
that's
lot of them are tied to the social manipulation programs. And when you look at really the psych industry being not much more than an extension of MK Ultra, I mean, what are they trying to do? They're trying to tell you how to interpret your spirituality. They're trying to tell you how to interpret your emotions. They're trying to, obtain agency over how your life is going to be interpreted. They want to take that away from you, hand it to themselves, not for the purpose of making you better, but to sell the drugs and the modalities that you probably don't want. And even when you tell them not to, they keep doing it. So when you have these experiences and you get attacked by the psych industry, they go after every bit of that experience. They go after you like you are, they're trying to devalue everything about you. They have to. It's a massive attack. It's not fun. They don't quit. They use the courtrooms. This isn't a joke. We're not kidding. And this is becoming normalized so much that it's really become a threat to society. Because when I look at things, you go through the Bible, New Testament, you can go through Corinthians about the die daily, and Colossians, put off your old self. I mean, how many times do we have to do this? And Matthew, by your words, you're justified. These kinds of practices that we're talking about, when you start engaging that neuroplastic side, they become permanent. So when you're talking about
yes,
dying daily, we're dying to distortion daily. We are dying to exaggeration. We're dying to narrative manipulation. We're dying to emotional self-justification. We're dying to victimhood. We're dying to all these things that society tells people to preserve about themselves and that are virtuous monuments in their life to be achieved. And we're in here going, no, we're tearing them up and
yeah,
rearranging things. And that makes a lot of people nervous. They think that we're just trying to do something that has no boundaries. But the what's so important about this practice and what we talk about constantly is the discernment part. We're not running away with fairy tales. That's what I
right.
mean. We experience it, we work, we keep going. But I don't know about you, but I don't spend a lot of time thinking about things that aren't happening. I'm
No.
engaged in my reality at the moment. At the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still reality. I mean, like I said, to be able to even sit comfortably, let alone walk, is miraculous. And I was able to, go to the store the other day or, do my errands and all, and it was just like thank you God, I couldn't believe it. But I will
Yeah.
say, when I got back, I started to have the numbness on my one side of my body where the nerve damage was the worst. And as I start to like walk up, we only have like a couple steps in this house, but my leg went completely numb. And I went, oh shit. And
Ooh.
so it's still reality, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
still was like, okay, let me drag this leg up the steps. And, it self-corrected within a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, it's reality, I still have to pay my bills. I still have to watch my budget. I mean, you still
Right.
got to pay your rent and do your chores. It's not, like, oh yeah, no, everything's perfect now. I'm sorry, you're
Right.
still living in reality. It's just that you have a grounding. You have the feeling of like some of the Psalms and everything where it's like God is my rock. And once you know that, you have a solid grounding, and then you're able to draw healthy boundaries. And this is what scares these folks because they see you standing on your own 2 feet. And they
Hmm.
don't like that because then they can't come in and keep taking and taking and taking and creating and controlling a completely false narrative when you hold them up to the light and be like, you're lying. And now I'm going to
Right.
tell people that you're lying. I didn't die of embarrassment. That's one thing I didn't die of. I've died of a couple things, but embarrassment's not one.
Yep.
So to me, it's like, now I'm going to keep calling you out for what y'all did to me. You tried to make me look like I was crazy. You tried to make me look a certain and particular way because you were refusing to actually help me when I was begging to leave somebody you knew was abusing me.
Right.
And like I said, come to find out, they hired him. He was part of the whole gig. And
Wow.
I have to deal with that, you know what I mean? And I do deal with that on a daily basis. But having said that, it's like, okay, you know what? I feel better because I knew deep down something wasn't right with him. I knew that. And then that made me kind of feel like, okay, now seeing how things are constructed and being able to put that together with my spiritual experience, a lot of things that I followed with followed up with the Kabbalah, with other spiritual books that I've read, with going back and seeing how that aligns with the Bible and historical things. It's just given me a deeper understanding and a deeper understanding of life's purpose, because just this physical reality, it just ain't it. It's not the
Right.
whole thing. This is a piece of what we experience as eternal energy, but this is not the whole thing. So once you have that larger perspective, once you have that certainty, you do have that peace that surpasses all understanding. And people can't pay for that. You
You
know,
can't.
you're not going to find it in a pill or a powder or anything else. You have to really go through and do the work. It has to come through an experience. And, you know, it's a damn shame that they want to try and suppress that, but then they can't sell their garbage. They can't sell the victimhood. They can't keep up that false narrative, and that's what they don't like. I realize it's a multi-billion with a B dollar, probably trillion-dollar a year industry, but that's just too damn bad.
Yep.
You know, it shouldn't be in place to begin with, and it never should have been in place to begin with.
I
So,
agree.
yeah,
If I could talk through what this represents to me, it's really a spot where emotions quit wavering. There wasn't you there kind of go back to what we were talking about, how we don't bargain anymore. That bargaining is gone. So what do you have left with? You got that energy and you're pushing that forward and you're not playing the victim game. And I would get up every day, I look at the sunrise and go, what am I going to take on today? And then it was a matter of
yeah,
just getting geared up and go do it. It didn't matter what the weather was like. It didn't matter what was going on. That's going to get done if that was something that had to get done that day. And that, when you're dealing with a catastrophic illness on top of it, is extremely challenging. But it's amazing what that cultivates in a person, how that strength comes up and you can just get on and face it. And you might look at somebody doing this and think, what do you do? Like, who's looking, people looking at me, I'm out in the middle of nowhere while I have this disease. What the heck are you doing out there? I'm training myself. That's what I'm doing. I'm getting better.
yes,
And it doesn't sound right. It sounds weird, but it really isn't, because we're dealing with 5 generations of trauma that is rolling up to block us from really understanding what's going on around us. And I can perfectly understand why some people have to have those psychedelics, because they've completely forgotten what these emotions that we're talking about feel like, how intense they are. I'm not a person that says do drugs to do this. No, I don't do that at
no,
all. But I could see if somebody is massively traumatized, has no idea how to even get their feet on the ground, they're stuck in that circular room spinning their wheels. I could really see where if you're with people who know what they're talking about, and I would say professionals, I think if this were
yeah.
done within the psych industry, that they would, and if they would
They'll
acknowledge
co-op.
spirituality for what it is, then we could start making some progress. But as long as we keep it stuck in the eugenics movement that's really more interested in doing social manipulation than it is actual healing in people, we're going to be stuck with this system that we have, which is not helping, certainly not helping me. I don't think it
No,
helped you either.
no. Me
So,
neither. They just added to my trauma. And the sad thing about it is Hopkins teamed up with Shepard Pratt. Both of them just nothing but fiction factories. They're terrible, terrible people in a number of ways. But they have like their Center for Consciousness is right next to the ECT. And I said to myself, fuck you both. Fuck you. Because I know what you're doing. I know
yep,
what you're doing. You're profiteering and you're trying to take certain people, misrepresent what their experience has been, extract all the information that they can, because they did it with me, and then keep that information for themselves. They rape my soul for their profit and gain. And I
hmm
will not ever stop being furious about it. But my thing is, I want to aim that in a direction that is positive, that exposes what it is they have been doing, because shame on them. Shame
right,
on them. They are making that they're just doing nothing more than the same thing that they did at the Nazi concentration camps, making a selection as to who should benefit and who should just, go croak.
right,
And the same ones writing a prescription for things they know to cause cancer, trying to force people by perjurious court order to take these things they know cause cancer, they know cause tardive dyskinesia. Shame on them. May they all be
exactly.
exposed. And I'm working to do it. and I'm letting people know exactly what's going on there. And how dare they try and pervert like a psychedelic experience, and then they're wanting people to microdose. And I'm thinking, no, you bastards, you're doing this completely wrong. And you
Right.
know you're doing it wrong because you know that information like what we're putting out there, like there really is a great spiritual awakening happening, and they don't want people to continue with that. They don't want people to get back to nature. They don't want people to get away from their false phony constructs and
Right.
their garbage. They're actual poisons. They're neurotoxic poisons, and they're made from petrochemical waste. And you
And
wonder
they're
why people are getting sick.
Yeah, and they're perfectly happy if you'll follow the prosperity gospelers and be, distracted on your journey. They're okay with spirituality as long as you don't get too precise about it. And once you start
Yeah.
getting precise about it and you can describe what happened, walk through it, stay consistent, believe me, these are indelible, experiences, so they don't go away. I mean, the intensity might go away because you're not dealing with it all the time, but the memory is certainly there. It's burned in, and you know what's going on from this point forward, and you decide, well, I'm going to go through whatever challenge I have to go through, whether it makes sense to anybody else or not. But I did notice that I got very confrontational about injustice. I got very confident, and I'll continue to be very confrontational with the psych
Same.
industry until this stuff that they're doing to people finally breaks. And when you're living in a society that values narrative management because they want to do forever wars and they want to do whatever else they can do to go out and steal from people because we've lost the formula when it comes to building value through our efforts and
Yeah,
working in tandem with God
that's
and the
it.
spirits and everything to bring things forward. They
Yeah.
want to just shortcut that and make sure that doesn't get rooted, because if that doesn't get rooted, then a handful of people stay in charge of you know everybody else, and everybody else stays in poverty, kind of like we have
Mhm.
today. So,
Yeah, they're
when
worshiping the golden calf. They're
yeah,
worshiping the golden calf, and they want everybody else to do that. And we see it through the World Economic Forum. It was led by the literal son of a Nazi. I mean,
mm,
and then you had Charles Schwab related to the same guy on Wall Street. So you can see how a lot of this is intertwined and interconnected. And that is a lot of what's going to come out in the Epstein files,
I think
is
so.
how all of this is very, very planned, how they plan certain things in order to then take away from other people. The
Hmm.
profiteering, I mean, people have often said it was World War II that took us out of the Depression in America. And that's true. It was the profiteering from, the military and all this. It did get people back to work, and everything that Roosevelt was trying to do to like put in place like different plans for, keeping infrastructure up and allowing people to have jobs from that has been systematically torn down over the years.
Hmm.
And it's been all these Wall Street elites in the background that have been doing it. It has nothing to do with one political party or another. I mean, I'm a staunch independent, and it's because I see through the bullshits. I'm
Right.
much more of a George Carlin type thinker. And that really has been my mindset since forever. And I do see this, and we have seen all this with black ops and the $1 million hammers or whatever. Back in the '80s, all this stuff was coming out about how certain things were getting funded, and
Oh,
those programs, including MK Ultra, including a lot of these other things that should never have been funded in the first place. Um,
wow.
and we're seeing that by extension, all that was due to come to a head regardless, and we're seeing it now. And that
Right.
is what's happening. And, because again, Epstein was in with Bear Stearns and all of these. So he wasn't just dealing with compromise, meaning worldwide, but he was dealing with the WEF. He
Mhm.
had a lot of ties to some of these leaders in psychiatry at different American universities and colleges. So I think we're going to see how a lot of that really is tied in together. And that's where I hope the death of these false narratives and these false constructs happens,
I do
because it's
too.
about time. Yeah.
If you know anybody that works in the intelligence, or you've been in the military like I have, or around the defense industry, you know how much manufacturing of war propaganda is a major deal. You talk about I can talk about profiteering in the defense industry all day long. I think the psych industry in many respects is worse because at least the defense industry has to churn out a product that kind of sort of works anyway. But really, I look at it as going back to what we talked about, getting rid of that fear of death, because once you get rid of that, you can't, you don't have fear of losing narrative control anymore. It's more, it is what it is. My yeses are yeses and my noes are noes. Things are what they are. I'm not going to sit around and join a club and get into some spreading of ridiculous ideas just because it's popular, just because my tribe does that,
Right.
just because somebody else needs that so they can go launch a war that never should have happened in the first place. And so
Yeah.
I think the more that they can get in and stick their fingers in the way of that, the more they can keep up the kind of gross corruption that we have to deal with on a regular basis. I just watched there was a House hearing the other day where they talked about how a political operative incorporated a business, and 8 days later was awarded a $148 million contract from which zero work was done for the Defense Department or the US government. And if people think that that is rare, you're crazy. You have no idea. What do you think a $1.5 trillion defense budget goes? Why do you think these people manufacture consent for war constantly? Why are they always saying this
Yeah.
person's an enemy, that person's an enemy? Pulling the fear channels. We don't, you can't manipulate me with fear. Can't manipulate Dana with fear. So
Right.
we don't fall for
Right.
that stuff. And then we start
Right.
confronting it. Of course, we're the bad guys, but we're not. We're just not going along with the narrative.
And you realize how much corporations are involved in this and how much profiteering there is between a lot of these war profiteers and the medical profiteers, and how much collusion there is too. When I think of how many of our brave veterans and troops have been hurt by these drugs, and they don't even care that they're hurting these folks with these drugs as opposed to working through the trauma, I'm horrified. I'm
Hmm.
horrified. My father had served in Korea.
Yep.
A lot of my family had served in various wars from World War II and Korea. I
Yep.
saw a lot of people come back from Vietnam very damaged. Um, and it has to do with trauma. And there was already trauma present for a lot of folks, and then that just compounded it. And they weren't wanting to deal with it, but just again carpet bomb these folks with drugs, much like how what we've had to deal with. And it's
Right.
wrong. And they know
Yep.
they're hurting people. And I think to myself, if these folks are brave enough to put their lives on the line for you and for freedom, and this is how you treat them, this is how you repay them, it's horrific. I'm just disgusted.
Hmm.
And they use the same types of propaganda with psychiatry. It is so much of that is tied in with studying how to break people, like what happened to me. And a lot of this is what they do and have been doing for years through MK Ultra, through a lot of these other programs, and even through seeing how veterans had come back from other wars, particularly with Korea, but that continued right on through. Um,
Hmm.
and it's disgusting, and the amount of they kind of have a lot of this propaganda out there too, what I would call soft propaganda. But when you realize just how much these corporations own, how much BlackRock owns, how much Vanguard owns, they bought the medical records place Iron Mountain during the pandemic. So
Not at
they
all
just they
surprised.
and that was when I was having issues even getting a hold of my medical records, but I realized they had some just bullshits on there. And I
Hmm.
thought to myself, yeah, because they had something like narcissistic personality disorder. And I thought to myself, lady, that's you. That's you, meaning the doctor. And I
Right.
knew that. And I was like horrified. And I had it corrected that time, but then come to find out there's been other I guess going into class action lawsuits from what I read against Hopkins for specifically about that. Probably other places too. And I'd even called and made an inquiry, and then somebody from another number called me back. And when I had, we chit chatted for a couple minutes, and I said, "Listen, there's no amount of money in the world that will ever be able to make up for the things that I've been through." And then the
Hmm.
guy pretended like he couldn't hear me and hung up. And I thought, oh, ha ha, yeah, you shut up, and it never called back. And I thought, yeah, it's because you know what I'm saying is the truth. And you just don't like hearing the truth. You don't like having it in your face. In a couple ways. A, money doesn't make up for everything. I'm sorry, not everybody worships the golden calf.
Right.
And two, now what I went through was literal torture. What I went through was trafficking, literal torture, having everything taken away from me. But having said that, when you talk about fear, death to fear and all this, I lost everything, and that used to be my greatest fear, was being homeless and losing everything. Well, now I have, and what? And what? I'm not afraid. I'm not
Right.
unstable. I'm still paying my damn bills. I'm doing everything that I need to do. I
Yeah.
reported all these folks to all the correct authorities multiple times over. And for me, any kind of lawyer that I've contacted, it's not about getting money, because even the one that was kind of interested in taking my case, I made it clear I wasn't signing a non-disclosure agreement, so they didn't want to work with me.
Right.
And I guess too, because I'm just not interested in money. It's just not what it is. I want to take what I've been through and do things like what we're doing now. I want to make
Hmm.
sure that this doesn't ever happen again to any other person, period.
Right.
And, you again, for the healing I've had, for the peace that I have, you can't, people would pay for that and they can't.
Right.
It has to come naturally. Money isn't everything, and some of these folks are just so corrupted, or so completely have just allowed their, themselves to become so perverted in multiple ways, I suppose, that they just
Hmm.
don't even understand that, people, that not everybody is a materialist, dickhead.
Right.
I don't know how else to
And,
put it.
and honestly, too, I think the only reason that it's not why it interferes in people's ability to make a living is because you are too direct. There's too many corporate jobs, especially, that they expect you to come in and be part of a narrative. You're not there to do a job. You're there to back up a
Right,
narrative, first and foremost, and secondarily, if you have some skills, maybe they'll put them to work. But when you're doing the slave to righteousness thing, this is freedom comes from, discipline, honesty, and agency comes by, it's a byproduct of renouncing distortion. You get rid of it. And discernment is really a skill that grows when you stop lying, and especially lying to yourself. So when you get a
right,
veteran, especially, who's been through an intense situation where facts are facts, when life and death are on the line, ambiguity disappears. So what happens to these people? They've gone through that. They've been through it. They've felt the power of those emotions. Then they're dumped back into a society that expects them to act disingenuously 80% of the time and be normal with that. They can't be normal with that. They'll never be normal with that again. Not the ones that have really gone through and know what that is all about. And so again, it gets down to the point where there could very easily be places where these people could go be productive workers, things of that nature, entrepreneurs doing lots of things, but they are not going to be narrative managers. You won't get that out of them,
right,
not without driving them into a state of instability. Because that's the
right.
conflict, right? If somebody comes up and insists that I be unstable, I'm not going to do it. You're not going to come up and tell me you're going to hang this diagnosis on yourself and you're going to walk with it for the rest of your life. No, I'm not.
Oh,
That's not going to
nope,
happen. So
nope.
it's I see the same kind of internal, stress that they're going to have to deal with, because they can't park those emotions in a place where there isn't any distortion. They need a completely different lifestyle, one that we're kind of talking about, that does not have that distortion as a primary, that's your function. If you can't demonstrate you're going to be part of the club, then you're not going to be here. They can't do that. I don't think. I think that's the
Yeah.
part that's really hurts them. So,
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I wake up every day and it's like I'm very grateful, but I do chakra clearing, I do meditation, I do yoga, and every day I schedule myself as far as reading things and really applying stuff, and then communicating and doing networking. Because there are enough people who do know me, do know my story, and it's like I don't mind telling it. I have no problem with that. And I feel like, and none of this has anything to do with money. And I was very glad the other day I realized that one of my favorite charities happens to be based like right up the street from where I am now.
Nice.
Alice's Kids. They're wonderful. And I wrote and I volunteered. I said, listen, if I said, I don't have a vehicle, but if you need somebody to do some work, I've donated to y'all before. I'm happy to donate my time and effort, let me know. Um, so now it's like every day I wake up with like a purpose. It's like, okay, I know what I'm doing.
Awesome.
And I do it in pieces. I told a Lyft driver the other day because I was trying to explain a little bit about what it is I'm doing for, holistics and all. I said, well, for me, I said, right now, I read everything. I said, it's my own thing. There's not a school to go to. And I'm glad because it seems like there's no credentialing for this, for what it is I want to do because
Hmm.
it does pull together a lot of things that other people already are doing, professionally, in different
Hmm.
fields, between people doing like, um, say autism, community, just to have like that sort of, one-on-one, or you know what I mean, for people to be able to get together and discuss their own experiences. And
Right.
it really is about trying to pull together all the, disability communities to stand up for our rights collectively. And how can we maybe make things work even for housing for all of us collectively?
Right.
Something that's affordable. Co-op. I think co-ops would be a beautiful thing, because some people are good at doing HVAC, other people are good at doing electric, some people are good at doing landscaping. And then that way it's like, well, we own the property and we can get all these phony baloney administrative nonsense and all these other folks out of the picture. They don't need to be there. They're just there to profiteer. If you go in
Right.
someplace and there's like 80 people standing around, they're not even doing anything. It's like, what do you even do? This doesn't even make sense. Put actual people who have the skills to be able to do certain things to work, to be able to work within their own communities, so that way it's truly nothing about us without us.
Right.
And that's what makes sense. We don't need outsiders coming in and trying to micromanage our lives. Get the hell out of here.
No.
Don't tell
Right.
me I'm an adult. I'm a grown-ass woman. I don't
Yeah.
need somebody babysitting me, period. I'm autistic. I have my issues, but they're not what they were trying to make things out to be. I
Right.
don't need a babysitter at all. And I
No.
definitely don't need mental health. Get the hell out of here, please. I
Right.
just don't. I have my own life and now I'm very happy. I'm very at peace. I every day I have, as my nervous system is able to re-regulate as I've been here, and I have an actual bed now. I didn't have a bed for years, and I'm not even
Wow.
going to go into just how awful my situation was for way too long. Um, but I know how to move forward, and I make my own schedule, and it's important to me, and I love that. I love having my life back now for the first time in my life. It's truly my life, and I value it. And that's something that I had to go through certain things to experience that and see like the larger picture and see how life is put
Hmm.
together, to really truly value and appreciate it, and to understand that we're all eternal energy having a temporary experience in these meat suits. So make
Right.
the best of it. We have designed it with God for a particular way, with others in our soul family, with other people that we meet, with experiences and challenges that we have. And it really is a matter of perspective from there, and
Right.
following it up in a very mature and level-headed fashion that doesn't require anybody coming in and trying to tell me that I'm wrong. Well, who the hell
Right.
are you? What's your
Exactly.
normal? I mean, they want to try and define normal as what? I don't know what the perverse shit that they do. I don't think so. And
No.
by that I mean like monetarily. I'm not talking about, and then to then turn around and try and, when you think how long people were demonized even for being homosexual, it's so ridiculous.
It
Or for
is.
having a different culture, or for being
Hmm.
indigenous. I mean, my God, my own people, weren't even allowed to practice our own religion until 1978. It was
Right.
illegal for Native Americans to have their own religion. They were selling Native American children right up through like I guess the early 70s. I
That's a
mean, so
horrific story, that whole thing. I mean, we don't understand
yeah,
how horrific it is. We don't want to look at it. We
right.
we want to be able to just say, "Oh, that didn't happen," or, oh,
Huh.
water under the bridge didn't. No, it still affects us today.
Oh,
because
yes.
we have these systems where people that are inside of them, they don't die daily to distortion. They don't try and take on the narratives. They keep furthering the narratives, and those kinds of narratives that say, oh, look how great this is. Look what we did.
No.
We don't want to talk about things like how we got out of a major depression by going out and stealing a bunch of land that was full of silver. The Comstock lode and all that stuff we hear about, that was large scale theft that got us out of another financial crisis. We don't talk about
Yes.
that. We don't talk about who it was ripped off from. We
Right.
just think, and this is a great thing. No, it isn't a great thing because I know that we can build value other ways. If we start
Oh,
getting rid of
yes.
this lying as part of our culture, our businesses will work better, our society will work better, our education system will massively get better. But the problem is
Oh,
we got to start
yes.
taking on narratives. And these aren't opinions. We're talking about narratives. For me,
Right.
God exists. That's a fact. Leave me alone. Well, guess what? We have an overlap. We have an industry that uses taxpayer money to overlap that with all kinds of eugenics era terminologies. Excuse me, that greatly devalue the depth and utility of those kinds of experiences. They make fun of them and they want you made fun of so you feel like an idiot so you don't talk about it. Because the less that you can articulate what's going on, the better off they can run their narrative and stick it into your life and force drugs into you or whatever other kind of toxic modalities that they think,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, absence of your opinion, that are going to be good for you, which is
Yeah.
strange for me. I mean, when did we start getting into medical people who first thing that they do is ignore everything the patient is telling them? That's kind of the baseline for the treatment. And then from there, they just start beating you into a point where it's like I was told at Pine Rest. My roommate told me, and I didn't quite believe him at first, but he said, "You got to tell them what they want to hear. You're never getting out of here." And I thought, no, they're doctors. This is that. No, he was right. This was a scam. This was straight up. We're going to label you. We're going to lie about you. We're going to do whatever we have to do to make sure that you don't leave here without a drug and a regular
Mhm.
regimen that you have to take that. It doesn't matter how false it is. Doesn't matter how bad the side effects are in your life. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is them keeping their narrative alive, and your civil rights don't matter. And this
Yeah.
is a huge problem because really that kind of mentality has taken over the business community. It has taken over the corporate communities. It's why we have massively overpaid CEOs who don't really add much
Oh,
value to the
yeah.
business and the business environment. And it's why it's crushing our competitiveness globally. And so we can't build anymore. So what do? We go steal it. And which is
Yeah.
what we're trying to do right now. And
Mm.
doing it to Venezuela, like we did to the
Yeah.
natives, like we're doing over in Iran, where we want them to turn over our oil so we can sell it for them. This is just absolutely crazy. It doesn't make any sense, but this is narrative management, and we're stuck in the middle of it, and that's why we hate it.
And too, they a lot of times, and there's actually a book, and this young lady had written it as fiction, but she got a lot of foils to write it, and it's called Blind Reason, by a woman named Rose St. John. And it really goes into how big pharma and the psychiatry industry has had a lot of Nazi money. And
Hmm.
it's where they have laundered a lot of Nazi money, and that is ongoing. People don't think it's ongoing. It's exactly what they did to the Jewish people in Germany was taking their property,
Yep.
taking their land, taking their wealth, taking their possessions for themselves. And now we have psychiatry here. Hopkins is one that's known to do it and put liens on people's homes, and they do it. And this happens across in primarily Black and Brown communities,
Right.
indigenous communities. It's continued. It still keeps
Hmm.
happening, and this is what they do. And when they medically kidnap people and then put liens on their homes because they can't pay the bills, and guess what? It's the same thing. And then they want to build these, for homeless people and do all the blame the victim and all this, and then want to try and warehouse them in psychiatry. And that's just not necessary. They know it, and they know these are eugenics drugs. They know they take years off people's lives, and they're designed
Hmm.
to give cancer. They're the exact same chemical compounds they give in other countries for purposes of torture. It's why when I called Medicare and told them about akathisia, they didn't even want to spell it properly. And here I am, dyslexic, and I'd written it down on a piece of paper. I said, "Do you want me to spell it for you?" And I did, and they still spelled it wrong on my complaint. And I said, "Oh no, ma'am, Pam, we're not playing this. I'm
Right.
done."
Yeah.
And I had been for more than a few minutes, and I thought, this is why God had me cut the head off the snake in Baltimore. This is why God had me dealing with some of the people who are pumping out the most kind of fiction, because everybody wants to hold up Hopkins and Trevor, ignoring the fact that Hopkins has been more than problematic for multiple years with Henrietta Lacks,
Hmm.
the lead paint stuff that went on where they were being paid by the landlords to do funny business to say that lead paint wasn't going.
Right.
Same thing, and
Right.
then this one getting money from both Johnson and Johnson for the risperidone and the Invega, and at the same time getting money from Ingrezza,
Right.
that bitch. I mean, and she was the one writing all the fiction in my, or basically in charge of it. And again, not just for me, I just know me personally, but for the entirety of so many people getting kickbacks from these forms of perjury,
Right.
in court, being perjurous for these involuntary commitments and these forced druggings that were happening. She was getting making money head over fist. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just terrible. And so I'm very glad that I've been able to report what I needed to report. And it wasn't just in Maryland, by the way. She was doing this in other states. And this fraud criminal ring has been going from state to state. I wonder for how many years. Identity theft, fraud,
Hmm.
credit card theft, uh, all of it, all of it,
Right.
insurance fraud, all of it. And what gets me, like I said, was the state of Maryland knew they were employing crooks and criminals who had been indicted in other states. And I'm like, again, I'm furious about it, but I'm aiming that in a way that I'm making sure the system gets collapsed. I'm going to
Right.
make sure that I'm going to report everything so that the average person knows what's out there, what's been going on, because I'm tired of it. Baltimore has
Right.
had more than enough shit go down in it for too many years, and so have other places who used to rely on manufacturing, from Detroit to Philadelphia to parts of New York, and places where these criminals are known to go in and put a false construct up. Because they know
Hmm.
people are poor. They know the jobs are no longer there. They know the economic base is no longer there. So they dump all kinds of street drugs out there and play blame the victim with that too. And I'm
Right.
more than a little tired of it. I've lost too many people already. That's enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
I
enough.
think when you look at what they're doing with these new warehouses, even I think the one in Salt Lake City is the one that really got my attention because they were
Yeah,
talking about the amount of money that it was going to take to run a 1,200 bed, basically concentration camp for somebody that doesn't have a house, or is offending the sense of if somebody's having dinner and someone walks by the sidewalk and that doesn't fit the upscale look, then they can just haul them off and get rid of them. They can, do neighborhood cleanup by moving these people to this concentration camp where the cost of running this place for 1,200 people equates to about $250,000 per head. I'm not exaggerating. That's absolutely the case. That's the budget. That's go look it up
right.
and do the math. It's not really hard. And you start looking at this is becoming a much bigger problem than the defense industry ever was. And these are people who know
Yes.
that they're going along with these. They're not interested in dying to distortion. They're interested in keeping
Right.
that system going. That's what they've been trained to do. They've been trained to be duplicitous. They've been trained to not tell you the truth. They've been trained to not listen to you. And this isn't a joke. I would love to have somebody come on from the psych industry. If you want to challenge me on this, I got all these records here. You have your experiences. How many experiences we had? How many people can we pull on here that are going to get on your face and tell you you're crazy? We're not
The whole
putting up with
insurance
you.
industry's a fraud.
Right.
Yeah.
So To me, they've
One of the
really
things I
stepped over
found
the edge.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting about that article, because I remembered reading it, was one of the people responsible for it had mentioned, of all things, the Baltimore bridge collapse, the Key Bridge collapse, which was always highly suspect anyway,
Hmm.
because they they got it, it was done for insurance money. That's all it was. And I thought, what in the world is this man even doing mentioning that? And I thought, oh, you're just telling on yourself is what you're doing.
Right.
You're just admitting you're just a bunch of insurance, crooks and schemers and
Hmm.
scammers. That's what you are.
Right.
You know,
So,
you creating those false constructs for government money, and that's where the Medicaid and Medicare fraud is. It isn't in the people that need it. It's in the people who are administering it who are doing fraud.
right. That's
You
exactly
know,
right. And
yeah,
it's very frustrating because it's professional fraud. It's
yeah.
widespread. We have an ethics crisis of epic proportions that could
Oh
very
my God.
easily completely destroy the country if we even survive this goofy war that we just started, which is questionable at this point. And so now we're sitting here, chickens are coming home to roost. And now's not the time to sit around and go, "Who told you so?" Now we have to say, listen, we have to turn this process into something that people can understand. So I'm really pushing to just take the New Testament and say, look, it's all in there. What we're talking about is all there, but you just have to add
Yeah,
this one little idea, which is you don't have to wait for your body to die to have your rebirthing experience. And it is extremely powerful as we tried to get across to everybody in the beginning. These things
yeah,
are like getting hit by lightning. They will knock you into next week. But if you're around people that know what you're going through, it can help facilitate it. You're going to have the best experience of your life and you'll come out of it way
oh
better off.
yeah,
But you get the
oh
wrong
yeah,
person in there that starts pulling levers, making accusations, pathologizing things that have no pathology to them, doing everything they can to make what you're going through look diseased and
yeah,
crazy. And then they can market that to the rest of society as this is a person that you don't want to talk to. This is a person you need to avoid because, they just don't have it together. When really that's not the case at all because we're sitting here talking about discernment as being a huge part of this whole thing. I think what they really don't like is the fact that when you come out of these things, you are very aggressive about confronting um, liars. You're very
yeah,
aggressive about confronting fraud. Injustice will rip you,
yeah,
and I mean, it's just injustice becomes destabilizing when you're in that stabilizing mode. So what do? You go after it, you call it out, you point it out, and do systems that try to preserve distortion like that? No, they hate that. They can't stand it and they want you out. And they can't get you out fast enough. So we have to really look at these dynamics, understand what they are, and start doing a course correction before we're going to descend into such chaos that we don't know. We'll never be able to get our way out of it. And that's what scares me the most. So,
yeah. I think that's why it's really important that those of us who both have had these spiritual experiences and are part of the survivor community are able to get together and build workable alternatives, be able to provide this as a framework to people and say, listen, this is far more cost effective in terms, yeah, monetarily, yes, but in
hmm,
terms of human life, in terms of the people that you're actually going to be saving as opposed to actively harming, it's
right.
huge.
It
It's
is
huge.
huge.
This doesn't, we don't need to have people controlling our language and all to where you're not even allowed to speak about suicide. I saw that the actor Robert Carradine had unfortunately taken his own life recently. And I thought, my God, once again, we have somebody who could have benefited
Yep.
from having actual adults talk about complexity of life, talk about these feelings, talk about how to move through them instead of feeling like you're going to be shamed, you're going to be
Right.
embarrassed, you're not going to have an outlet, you're going to be dragged off to a torture chamber and forcibly drugged and everything else. And that's why we're seeing a lot of this too. Because it's not just the drugs, it's the fear of having to go through that. and it makes people afraid of discussing their feelings. Well, why are we living in such a, a society of charades then? It doesn't
Right.
make any sense that they want to now control language. They want to now control, pretend like things are very simplistic when actually just life is complex. Life is
Hmm.
complicated. It contains trauma. It doesn't need to be drugged, and it shouldn't be drugged. It needs to be worked through. We need one another. We need that interpersonal neurobiology. People have forgotten the importance of connecting on a number of levels,
Right.
for different things, both for laughter, for tears, for everything.
Hmm.
It's part of the human experience, and they're really
Right.
trying to remove that and insert themselves as insofar as possible. There's no such thing as chemical imbalance. I'm so tired of that lie.
Yeah, me
Everything
too.
has to do with trauma and the human experience, and having feelings and emotions. Emotions are not the enemy. It's the people who are trying to control and manipulate them that are.
Right. So, I look back at what happened in 1890, on at Wounded Knee. That right there, what we're talking about, people going through suffering, and you're doing that, you're pushing back and doing what convinced they had a spiritual experience from that opened the door to this is what
Yes.
Christianity is. We're not supposed to wait for our bodies to die. Now they're starting to do this. They're all happy. They're celebrating, even in the midst of nowhere, after everything's been stolen, taken, ripped off from them. And what do? Attack them. Then we killed them. And then we gave the people who did that medals of honor. Why do you do stuff like that? Because you don't want people to know those things. You want these
That
distorted, perverted systems to stay intact, so people put their energy behind keeping these distorted, perverted systems intact. And the problem is that they're
yeah.
not going to stay intact, and we've lost. Imagine if we would have taken that seriously, what was going on at Wounded Knee, understood what was happening with those people, understand those aspects of suffering, but we didn't care because they were disposable, they were subhuman, they weren't part of the tribe, they were, terrorists, they were whatever you want to call them. So let's wipe them out, isolate them, stick them off in a corner, and let them suffer until they decide that they want to join us. And that is just a sick, sadistic mentality that I wish we could just get rid of. But until we let people understand what getting rid of the fear of death does for you, we're going to be stuck with it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, people need to understand, and that's exactly what the Nazis did. I mean, that is exactly what Hitler and all of them did. They took that framework of what was going on here with Native Americans and applied it to Germany and applied it to Jewish people,
Hmm.
homosexuals, the
Yep.
Sinti people, anybody that, artists, intellectuals, priests, anybody who was genuinely trying to have their own life, and celebrate an actual spirituality, and build a community,
Yeah.
and and Rockefeller helped fund it, and look at what he's been funding here. So it's
Yeah.
not, what we're talking about is hardly conspiracy, it's fact.
It
And it's
is.
just
It's
facts that certain people don't want to confront because they have enjoyed the unearned control for way too long, way too long. And
exactly.
it's a lot of corrupt corporations, and people who have way more money than ever, and than any one group of people or small group of people or family should ever have.
Right.
And it
I
doesn't make
completely agree
sense.
with
It's
you.
a false construct anyway. Money's a
Yeah.
false construct and a false power. And these people have collected way too much of it, and they've built a lot of false narratives around it. But I think we're seeing that crumble.
Hmm.
We have to learn value is in ourselves, value is in values. Value is in being able to do something. We should go back to a barter system, and maybe we will, and we'd all be better off for it if that happened, because then at least we'd be producing things here in the US again. At least we'd be productive and have a manufacturing base again. At least we'd be, self-reliant again in that way.
Hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, once we get the honesty back, and I think the other thing that I want to push about this is that, again, with the discernment being such an important part of it, I'm going to tell you, I've never felt, you talk about intelligence, you want to understand how UFOs work, and I'm not talking about in a weird, mystical, you'll never be able to translate this kind of a way. the insights that come in, and when you start working, when you're rejecting deception, the amount of intelligence that starts pouring into you, and as a
Oh,
person
yes.
that you now have access to that you can set in motion and put into work for your life, you become massively more productive. Our
Yeah.
productivity problem is directly related to the fact that we have people, you know, being narrative managers and expecting everybody to
Yeah.
march along with the narrative, not with reality. And we really have to start breaking that mystical idea as it relates to spiritual experiences. They're not. They are reality. They're more reality than what most people want to give them credit for. But once you do give them credit for that, you start feeling them start working in your life and it becomes a
Right.
tool. That's what it did for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Same here. It has allowed me a very clear vision, um, an absolute way of being able to put my energy towards things in a very positive way that I'm able to have my own life and a stability and a sense of being able to direct myself in a positive and productive fashion so
mhm.
that every day I can make markers in my own progress,
Right,
um as far as the things I'm doing and feel good about it, and that comes out of a legit um sense of being able to do something and being able to contribute things and knowing that I'm working towards a bigger contribution and part of something that matters,
right.
and living my purpose. God has revealed his purpose for me, and for that I'm truly grateful, because I kind of was wondering for a while, like, what do you even have me here for, God? I don't understand this. I've been
Right.
through so much and I keep going through so much. Well, now I know, and I'm
Mhm.
comfortable with that, and I feel, not just the peace beyond all understanding, but that joy of being connected to something larger than myself and having
Right.
a greater understanding of it. And it matters. You, again, you can't pay for that. That's something that has to come out of experience. And I
Completely
would
agree.
want people to have this experience for themselves. I really do.
I do. I do too, because I think it
Yeah.
would fix so many problems. There's very few problems that I can't imagine would be fixed by somebody that has an experience like
Right.
this. It's And again, as we've said, we can't describe it. There isn't language to
Yeah.
describe what we're talking about. You have to do it yourself. You have to experience it yourself. But to do that requires you have to start integrating a radical, deep honesty into your life of the kind that society here, especially right now, doesn't like. And that can be problematic for people's income, for their careers, for a number of things. But, every once in a while, you got to do the Norm Finkelstein thing and say, yeah, okay, this is going to sink my career, but I got to say what I got to say.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. To me, I mean, I've always had been a creative person, so I'd already liked being part of the artistic community, and then I was welcome as part of the autistic community, and I never should have been mislabeled. And it makes me feel good that to be able to have like acceptance and to be able to tell people, listen, acceptance is the way to go. You just have to accept people as long as nobody's hurting anybody else, manipulating anybody else, trying to pull schemes, scams, and fraud.
Hmm.
Accept other people as they are and help them be their best selves. Nobody has
Yeah.
to be like you. That doesn't matter, but find the things you have in common with other people and celebrate that.
Right.
That matters. Looking at things toward a positive and being able to work to uplift other people, that matters. It
Hmm.
really does.
And,
I've never ever felt the jealousy. I don't know what that is, and I'm glad. I've seen people and it looks like it destroys them.
right.
Um, and I don't understand that. It's just there's certain emotions that I just don't understand. I don't understand greed. I and I feel like I'm better off for it, and if people want to look at me and say, well, that's crazy, well, then you know what? Let me be crazy in that sense, because these are things that I don't understand. They don't appeal to me, and I don't want to be around people who dwell in them. That just
I
is not my bag. I'm not comfortable with that vibe. I don't like
I
it.
completely agree. And yeah, my attitude with people is more like, look, everybody here if you've not had a rebirthing experience, which unfortunately today they're rare, I think in some very short term future they're going to be very commonplace. But until we get there, we have to realize that everything that we go and try and approach somebody and talk to them, they're going to look at us as like we're trying to we're trying to attack them when we're not, and we have to somehow turn this thing into an understanding where there is a process that you can unwind yourself from all that stuff, but the bedrock honesty has got to be there. If it's not there, then you're going to start playing victim. You'll start doing all the other compromise kind of behaviors that take your sidetrack what you're trying to do and actually end up sabotaging everything that you're trying to do if you're not careful. And then that when you throw your spiritual walk off, that's a really hard place to be because you start thinking you're getting punished all the time, like you were mentioning. And what is the purpose of this? Well, we know what it is. To defend and explain, and however wherever that takes us is where it takes us. So that's the way I look at it. And with
Yeah.
that, I think we've done our
Yeah.
hour.
Same here. Oh
Awesome.
my gosh. Oh wow. It
Time
always goes so
flies.
fast. Yes,
All
it
right.
does.
Thank you so much once again, Dane. I think I don't know about you, but for
Okay.
me, just being able to articulate this stuff is a massive help to me because I'm starting to
Same
get to the
here,
point where
believe
the
me.
language is integrating and I can, flow with it a lot easier. And I feel like we're really starting to help shake off the stigma for both of us by doing this. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate everything
Thank
about
you,
you
hon.
and I appreciate your time. And I'll see you again next week.
All righty, hon. God bless. Take care.
Same
Much
here.
love,
God
and I'll see
bless.
you then.
We'll see you.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.